Okay, so this video is called Early English Attempts at Settlement in the New World, essentially. So we want to start out with exploring exploration, trade, and colonies, and kind of tied this video and the last video together. So once the European countries settled and began to kind of understand the New World, and they put some colonies here, there was an exchange of goods, of plants, animals, even diseases that went back and forth between the New World and the Old World. So the Europeans brought stuff over, they took stuff back from the Old World, and this became known as the Columbian Exchange. The diseases were the stuff that they brought over that really affected tons of Native Americans. It killed a lot of them, but there was some goods and plants and animals exchanged during this process as well. So by the 1600s, because all these colonies had started to settle, whether they were Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, doesn't matter, slavery was becoming very established in the New World due to the rise in plantations or large farms. There were sugar plantations. You began to see other plantations pop up, cotton down the road, stuff like that. But plantations was a huge economic plus, I guess, or it was a huge economic factor in the New World, and slavery was a big part of that. So the European colonies set up in the New World and used slaves to work on the farms or other manual labor throughout the various colonies they had. And this is all European colonies. Every European colony at this point kind of had slaves in the New World. The rise of slaves in the New World led to the development of the triangular trade, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. Once again, I have a map. You may not laugh at my map. I feel like it is extremely accurate. So over time, the colonies grew more and more dependent on slaves. So the slave trade became very profitable, and you had European slave traders that were selling and trading slaves off and making a huge profit off of that. And here's the triangular trade. So you can see the ships leave Europe, they sail down to the coast of Africa, and they force and just take advantage of the people in Africa and force them into these slaves. They sail over the Atlantic Ocean to the New World, to the Americas, drop the slaves off, sell them there. They sail back to Europe to take a break, refuel, whatever the case is. Not refuel, I guess if the ships don't run on gas, but get supplies for another journey. They keep going and going. So the triangle refers to the points of Europe, Africa, and the New World, or the Americas. And they made up the slave trade. This is a very profitable business, despite the immorality of it and how terrible it was. This leg right here from Africa to North America became known as the Middle Passage because it was the middle part of the triangular trade. And this is the part that slaves were tucked into boats. They were slammed side by side. You could barely stand up in the boats. That they were under deck in the boats, and they were laying down. They were poorly fed, very dehydrated, using the bathroom down there. I mean, it was a terrible existence, obviously, and that's kind of what that was. We call this Middle Passage because it is the middle part, but it really is the beginning of what slavery is going to be like for these people that were forced into slavery, and just the cruelties they suffered for the Middle Passage on. Oh, is terrible. Hang on, let me fix these boards. Everything's good. Let me check the camera. Pause, timeout. Okay, we're good. Sorry for that confusion. All right, so now that we've talked about the Columbian Exchange and the triangular trade, we want to get into how the colonies began to set up. This is the first English attempts at colonies. You have Queen Elizabeth of England granted Sir Walter Raleigh a charter to set up a new colony in the New World or in North America, and Raleigh sponsored the first expedition to Roanoke Island. He named that area Virginia. But the colonists ran into trouble with Native Americans. They didn't really know how to survive over there. They were running low on supplies, so they returned to England. First attempt, not very successful. Raleigh sent another group in 1587, led by John White. White returned to England to kind of get some supplies and touch base at home, but was held up by the war between the English and Spanish, so he couldn't get back to his colony in America for years. And so when he did return in 1590, his colony was gone, and this is what we call the lost colony of Roanoke Island. But all he found was the word Croatoan, which was carved into a tree. Now, the Croatoan Indians were a name of a nearby tribe, but we never put anything together as far as why they disappeared, where they went. There's a lot of stipulations out there. Maybe they joined up with the Native Americans. Maybe they were killed by Native Americans. Maybe they all died from starvation. Whatever the case is, nobody knows what happened to this Roanoke colony, which is why it became known as the Lost Colony. So future English colonies, eventually, it took money to start colonies, and not everybody had the money that Sir Walter Raleigh did, and he lost a lot of money doing this. And so people began to start joint stock companies, which were companies funded by investors. So they put a little bit of money into this effort, and then they get money back when it makes profit, and they also take on the risk as well. So each investor, joint stock company, owned a part of every colony they started, and they shared the profits that came back out. So the Virginia Company of London founded Jamestown, which is a colony that located off the James River, and it was located there because they were they were afraid that the Spanish would attack them, so they hid enough inland where the Spanish couldn't see them, but they were still on the river. They can get out to the ocean if they needed to. So Jamestown was established in 1607. It was the first successful English colony, but they did suffer at first as they didn't know how to farm. They were getting sick, and the climate was a little bit harsher than they were expecting. But the colonists were told that they were going to find gold. All right, so they were told they were going to find gold, so they spent all their time looking for gold. And obviously, in Virginia and North Carolina, there is no gold. And so instead of farming and fishing and building houses like they should have to learn how to survive, they were hunting for gold, and they never found any gold. So that posed a problem. Many of the colonists obviously died, so John Smith took control, and with his help and other leaders, they were able to learn how to survive. All right, so colonists learned to build shelter, they learned to hunt, farm, fish. They started trading with Native Americans. And the colonists, with the help of John Rolfe, who was actually the John that married Pocahontas, learned to grow tobacco, which proved to be a very profitable crop for the Jamestown colony and is really what caused them to flourish and become successful. So growing tobacco was a huge plus for Jamestown. The Virginia Company, which founded the Jamestown colony, this joint stock company, failed. So King James I made Jamestown a royal colony, which are going to become important later on, and it was ruled by the king's appointed officials. So instead of being ruled by a group of investors, Jamestown became a royal colony, and it was ruled by the kings, basically the people he appointed. So that's the Jamestown colony. The Plymouth colony is a group of people known as separatists, and they wanted to separate from the Church of England, and King James persecuted them for that. They wanted to be their own church, and King James wouldn't let them, so they left England and created a colony at Plymouth. Now, just to back up a little bit, the Catholic Church was once the church of pretty much all of Europe. And then England said, no, we want to make our own church. We're going to make the Church of England. One of the kings did. And so they separated from Catholicism, the Catholic Church, created the Church of England, and now you have this separatist group of people who decide they want to break away from the Church of England and be their own type of Christianity. So on the way to America, the men aboard the ship, the Mayflower, signed the Mayflower Compact. They basically all agreed to be a self-governed society. It was the first real official form of formal government in the English colonies. This group of people became known as Pilgrims, and they moved to escape religious persecution. So they were being persecuted for their religious views. They moved to America. They landed at Plymouth Rock, and they became the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims struggled at first, but the Native Americans, with the help of a very famous Native American named Squanto, did help them survive, and they were very successful from that point on. The last colony we're going to talk about is the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is also another religious group known as the Puritans, and they're a group of people who wanted to purify the Church of England of any of its kind of Catholic ways. And people said the Church of England was still kind of like the Catholic Church, and they wanted to purify that. So the Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England, make it whole again, make it right, and they suffered a lot of persecution for that. So in 1629, a joint stock company named the Massachusetts Bay Company received a royal charter to start a new colony. So the Puritans sailed to America and landed in Massachusetts Bay Area, and they started the city known as Boston, which obviously becomes a very important city in United States history, and it still is today. Puritans wanted religious freedom. All right, they wanted to be able to choose their own religion, escape that persecution, but they did not tolerate other religions very well. So even though they were frustrated with the Church of England and the Catholic and the Catholic ways of other churches, that they came over here to start their own church. They said, hey, you need to follow our church. And it kind of grew into a very interesting dynamic. You're going to see a lot of people break away from Puritan as we move forward. So Puritans valued a church that was run by the congregation, not a king, a bishop, or a minister, or anything like that. So the people had a voice. And these democratic ideals were some of the first ones in North America, some of the first examples of this. And so the democratic ideals from the Puritan church grew to the colonies very quickly. People wanted to have a voice in what they were saying. So the Jamestown colony, the Plymouth colony, Massachusetts Bay colony are all very important, and they are some of the first attempts, successful attempts, at English settlements in the New World.